The lighthouse keeper's last log. What really happened? At the very edge of the world, on a sliver of rock beaten down by the North Atlantic, stands a lonely tower. For over a century, it's held its vigil, a silent monument to one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries in all of maritime history. In the winter of 1900, this place, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse, became a tomb of secrets when its three keepers simply vanished from the face of the earth. They were erased, leaving behind nothing but perplexing clues that have fueled 100 years of fear, debate, and wild speculation. These weren't just names in a logbook. They were fathers, husbands, and sons who walked into the heart of a mystery and never returned. Tonight, we're lighting the lamps on this cold case one more time. We'll walk the storm-battered cliffs, step into the abandoned rooms, and read the final cryptic words they left behind. We are going to piece together all the evidence, from the mundane to the terrifying, to uncover what really happened to the keepers of the Flannan Isles. In December 1900, on a remote storm-lashed island off the coast of Scotland, 3 men vanished without a trace. They left behind a table set for a meal that was never eaten, a stopped clock, and a final chilling entry in their logbook. More than a century later, the mystery of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers endures. Tonight, we piece together the final, terrifying moments of these men and ask, what really happened at the edge of the world? Our story begins in a place that feels more like myth than reality. The Flannan Isles, a small, severe cluster of 7 islands known to locals as the Seven Hunters. Found 21 miles west of the already remote Isle of Lewis in Scotland, they're little more than jagged teeth of rock jutting from the perpetually furious North Atlantic. For centuries, these islands were a place of superstition. Shepherds would bring their flocks to graze on the largest island, Eilean Moor. But they would never, ever stay the night, fearing the spirits they believed haunted the land. They called it the other country, a place set apart from the world of the living. It was on this haunted rock that the Northern Lighthouse Board decided to build a beacon. The waters here were treacherous, a graveyard for ships, and a light was a modern marvel, meant to tame an ancient peril. Designed by the famous lighthouse engineer David Allen Stevenson, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse was a testament to Victorian ambition. Construction was a brutal 5-year struggle against the elements. Every block of stone and bag of cement had to be winched up sheer 150-foot cliffs from supply boats tossing on the waves below. The lighthouse tower itself stood 74 feet tall, a white spear against a gray sky, with its lamp perched 275 feet above the raging sea. On December 7, 1899, its powerful beam cut through the darkness for the first time. It was a symbol of safety. No one could have imagined that in just 1 year, it would become the center of a mystery that made it more feared than any storm. Life at Eilean Moor was one of profound isolation and rigid routine. The lighthouse was manned by a crew of 4 keepers in rotation, 3 on the island and 1 on shore leave. For 6 weeks at a time, the 3 men on duty were the only souls on the island. Their lives were governed by the clock and the lamp. Tending the light was a relentless, meticulous job. The paraffin lamps had to be kept burning, the lenses polished, and the clockwork mechanism that rotated the great lens had to be wound and maintained. Their days were filled with cleaning, painting, repairing, and endless observation, all recorded in a detailed log. In December of 1900, the 3 men holding this lonely vigil were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. These weren't rookies. They were seasoned men of the sea and the service. James Ducat was the principal keeper, the man in charge. At 43, he was a veteran with over 2 decades of service. He was a family man with a wife and 4 children waiting for him back home. Ducat was known to be steady, reliable, and experienced, the perfect person to command such a remote post. And yet there are hints he was uneasy. He'd reportedly told his supervisor that Eilean Moor wasn't a suitable place for a man with a young family, a comment that now seems like a chilling premonition. The second assistant was Thomas Marshall, a 28-year-old bachelor. He'd been a seaman before joining the service, so he was no stranger to the ocean's fury. Records suggest a small detail about his past. He'd once been fined 5 shillings when some equipment was washed away during a gale at another station. It was a minor mistake, But in a service that prized diligence above all, it was a mark against his name, a mistake he would be determined never to repeat. The third man was Donald MacArthur. He was an occasional keeper, a substitute filling in for a colleague on sick leave. At 40, MacArthur was a tough, seasoned mariner from the nearby village of Brescleet. He was an old soldier and known as a bit of a brawler, a man with a reputation for a short temper. For a man like that, the crushing silence of Eilean Moor, broken only by the howling wind, must have been its own kind of torment. These were the three men, bound together by duty at the edge of the world. A steady family man, a younger keeper with something to prove, and a volatile tough guy. As Christmas of 1900 approached, they were counting the days until the relief ship, the Hesperus, would arrive. But the Hesperus would find only silence. The men were about to become a permanent part of the island's ghostly lore. The first sign that something was terribly wrong at Eilean Moor came not from the island, but from the dark waters it was meant to protect. On the night of December 15, 1900, the steamer Archtor passed through the area, and its captain noted in his log that the Flannan light was out. A dark lighthouse is a serious danger. When the Archtor docked 3 days later, the sighting was reported to the Northern Lighthouse Board. However, due to some holiday slowness or bureaucratic mix-up, the report wasn't immediately acted upon. After all, the relief ship, the Hesperus, was scheduled to sail on December 20th anyway. But the Atlantic had other ideas. Vicious storms swept through the Outer Hebrides, trapping the Hesperus, under the command of Captain Jim Harvey, in port. For 6 long days, the ship waited for a break in the weather. Finally, on the morning of December 26th, Christmas Day having come and gone, the seas calmed just enough for the ship to make its journey. On board was Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, looking forward to seeing his colleagues. As the Hesperus approached Eilean Moor around noon, a strange quiet hung over the island. There was no flag flying from the flagpole to greet the ship. There were no provision boxes waiting on the landing stage to be restocked. And most unnerving of all, there were no men. Normally, all 3 keepers would be waiting at the landing to welcome the ship. Today, there was just the lonely cry of gulls. Captain Harvey ordered the ship's whistle to be blown. Silence. He fired a signal flare. Still nothing. A deep sense of dread began to settle over the ship. A small boat was lowered, and Joseph Moore was rowed to the eastern landing. He leaped onto the slippery rock and began the long climb up the steep stone staircase carved into the cliff. He found the main gate to the compound closed. He continued to the main door of the living quarters. It was also closed, but it was unlocked. He pushed the door open. The air was cold, heavy with an unnatural silence. The first thing he saw was the kitchen clock, its pendulum still. On the table, he saw plates and utensils laid out for a meal that had clearly never been eaten. A single chair was knocked on its side, as if someone had jumped up from the table in a great hurry. In the entranceway, 2 of the 3 sets of heavy oilskins, the keeper's foul-weather gear, were missing, but 1 set remained hanging on its hook. This was deeply disturbing. No keeper would ever venture out into a December storm in the North Atlantic without his oilskins. It was a death sentence. Moore's search of the living quarters revealed more strangeness. The beds were unmade, which was unusual for such disciplined men. But in the lantern room, the lamps were perfect. They had been cleaned, trimmed, and refilled, ready to be lit for the coming night. It seemed the men had gone about their morning duties as usual before they vanished. The only sign of life was a canary, still alive in its cage, a silent witness. I did not take time to search further, Moore later reported, for I only too well knew something serious had occurred. He fled the silent lighthouse and scrambled back down the steps. The grim news was relayed to Captain Harvey. The lighthouse was deserted. The men were gone. Captain Harvey sent 2 more sailors ashore with Moore. They scoured every inch of the island, shouting the keepers' names into the wind, but found nothing. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, no clues. But when they made their way to the western landing, they found a scene of incredible violence. Iron railings that lined the path were bent and twisted out of shape. A railway track used to haul supplies up the cliff had been wrenched from its concrete moorings. A heavy supply box, normally kept in a secure crevice 110 feet above sea level, was smashed open, its contents scattered. Even more astonishingly, a massive rock weighing over a ton had been dislodged and moved. And on the very top of the cliff, more than 200 feet above the waves, thick carpets of turf had been ripped from the ground. The power required to do that was almost incomprehensible. It was clear a storm of unimaginable ferocity had battered this side of the island. That evening, Captain Harvey sent a chilling telegram to headquarters. A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane. Joseph Moore and 3 volunteers were left on the island to man the light. As darkness fell on December 26th, the Flannan light shone once more, but it now seemed less a beacon of safety and more a memorial, casting its sweeping gaze over the cold, dark water that held the secret of the 3 lost men. In the cold, abandoned lighthouse, investigators turned to the one thing that could speak for the missing men: the logbook. This was the official record of life on the island, a place for professional entries about weather and the light's performance. But in the years since, a second, more sensational version of the logbook has emerged, one filled with terror and despair. To figure out what really happened, we have to separate the facts from the fiction. First, the official record. The investigation, led by Superintendent Robert Muirhead, found the keeper's logbook itself was in perfect order. The last formal entry was on December 13th. Details for the 14th and the morning of the 15th were jotted down on a slate, ready to be neatly transferred into the log later. This confirms that at least one keeper was alive and working on the morning of Saturday, December 15th. The lamp was clean and ready. This suggests the men vanished sometime that afternoon. But this is where the story splits. A far more dramatic set of log entries has become central to the legend. These entries, which you've probably heard, paint a picture of men descending into madness. According to this popular but almost certainly fake version of the log, Thomas Marshall wrote a disturbing entry on December 12th. He allegedly described severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before. He went on to note that principal keeper James Ducat was very quiet, and that the tough as nails Donald MacArthur had been crying. This detail was shocking. The idea of MacArthur, a known brawler, openly weeping in fear of a storm, seemed completely out of character. The alleged entry for December 13th claimed the storm was still raging, and that all 3 men had been praying. Again, this seemed bizarre. These were professionals in a brand new fortress built to withstand the worst the Atlantic could throw at it. For 3 seasoned men to be reduced to prayer by a storm, no matter how severe, felt unbelievable. What makes these supposed entries so strange is that there were no reports of major storms in that area on December 12th, 13th, or 14th. The weather was rough, sure, but nothing unusual for a North Atlantic winter. This has led to speculation that the storm the men described wasn't a physical one, but a supernatural or psychological one. The final sensational entry is said to be from December 15th. It simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." That ominous sign-off was seen as a final, cryptic surrender to fate. So, were these terrifying log entries real? The overwhelming evidence says no. Official reports from the Northern Lighthouse Board make no mention of them. The real logs were professional and routine. The story of MacArthur crying and the God is over all sign-off appear to be later embellishments, fictions that likely started with a 1912 poem by Wilfred Wilson Gibson called Flannan Isles. That poem also introduced the unforgettable image of the uneaten meal and the overturned chair, cementing them in the public imagination. The legend of the haunted logbook was just a better story than the mundane reality. It created a tale of psychological horror. But even without the fake log entries, the facts were strange enough. 3 men were gone. The lighthouse was left in a state of eerie preparedness. And the West Landing was a scene of unbelievable destruction. The official investigation would have to piece these real clues together to find a rational explanation. On December 29, 1900, Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived on Eilean Moor to lead the official investigation. This wasn't just a professional duty for Muirhead. He knew all three of the missing men personally. He was the last person from the board to see them alive. Now, he was tasked with uncovering their fate. Muirhead was a practical man. He meticulously examined the lighthouse, the real logbook, the clothing left behind, and the catastrophic damage at the West Landing. After weighing all the evidence, he submitted his official report. His conclusion was sober, logical, and tragic. He theorized that the chain of events began on the afternoon of Saturday, December 15th. He believed that James Ducat and Thomas Marshall went down to the West Landing to secure a supply box full of mooring ropes and landing gear. With the sea state worsening, they would have been anxious to make sure nothing was lost. This makes perfect sense for Thomas Marshall, who had been fined before for losing equipment to a gale. He likely persuaded the senior keeper, Ducat, to go with him. Muirhead's report then paints a terrifying picture. As the two men worked near the storage box, 110 feet above the sea, an unexpectedly large roller, what we'd now call a rogue wave, surged up the face of the cliff. He wrote that the water went up higher than where they were, and coming down upon them had swept them away with resistless force. The power that moved a 1-ton boulder and mangled iron railings would have easily snatched two men from the rock and pulled them into the sea. This explained Ducat and Marshall. But what about Donald MacArthur? His oilskins were back in the lighthouse. According to the strict rules, one keeper had to be on duty inside at all times. MacArthur was obeying that rule. Muirhead concluded that MacArthur, from his post in the tower, likely saw the monstrous wave coming. Realizing his colleagues were in mortal danger, he did the only human thing he could. He ran to warn them. In his haste, he didn't stop for his coat, which explains the overturned chair. He dashed out of the lighthouse, down the path toward the West Landing, a lone figure charging into the gale. But he was too late. He might have arrived just as the wave struck, or in its violent aftermath, searching for his friends in the surge of white water. In the chaos, a second wave could have easily caught him too, sweeping him away to the same fate. This theory neatly accounted for the evidence: the two missing sets of oilskins, the one left behind, the sudden departure from the kitchen, and the immense damage at the West Landing. It was a dreadful accident, just as Captain Harvey first guessed. Robert Muirhead, the man who knew them, was satisfied this was the most likely explanation. This remains the official and most widely accepted theory. It's a story of duty and the unforgiving nature of the sea. There was no monster, no ghost, just the awesome power of water. Modern scientific studies have even confirmed that the specific geography of the Flannan Isles makes them prone to generating enormous rogue waves during certain storm conditions, adding scientific weight to Muirhead's 100-year-old conclusion. The men left behind families who would never have a body to bury. James Ducat left a wife and 4 children. Donald MacArthur left a wife and 2 children. For the Northern Lighthouse Board, the case was closed. But for the public, an explanation based on a wave, no matter how colossal, just wasn't enough. The eerie details left the door open for darker theories to take hold. While the rogue wave theory is the most logical, it has never been enough to satisfy everyone. The strangeness of the scene created a vacuum that has been filled with a century's worth of speculation, from the plausible to the bizarre. So what if it wasn't a wave? What if the danger came not from the sea, but from inside the lighthouse itself? One of the most persistent theories is that it was all down to a violent fight. Imagine the psychological pressure cooker of Eilean Moor. 3 men, confined to a tiny rock for weeks with only the howling wind for company. This theory usually centers on Donald MacArthur. He was known to be a volatile character, a brawler with a quick temper. Could the isolation have pushed him over the edge? The scenario goes something like this. An argument breaks out. MacArthur, in a fit of rage, attacks and kills Ducat and Marshall. The fight could have happened on the cliff edge, sending all 3 men into the sea during the struggle. A variation suggests that MacArthur murdered the other 2, threw their bodies into the ocean, and then, overcome with guilt, threw himself in after them. The evidence for this is purely circumstantial. It relies almost entirely on MacArthur's reputation. There was no sign of a struggle inside the lighthouse. In fact, it was noted to be tidy. But Superintendent Muirhead, who knew the men, dismissed the idea. A triple homicide seemed unthinkable. Given the island's eerie history, it's no surprise that supernatural theories quickly popped up. Locals already whispered of spirits calling the place the other country. This was fertile ground for terrifying explanations. Some said a giant sea serpent rose from the depths and snatched the men. Others blamed a colossal seabird. More elaborate tales spoke of the Phantom of the Seven Hunters, a ghost said to haunt the Isles, luring the keepers to their doom. In the modern era, these theories have been updated. The sea serpent became an alien spacecraft. Proponents of this idea point to those fake logbook entries, suggesting the storm the men feared wasn't of this world. Could the men have been abducted by a UFO? As intriguing as these ideas are, they exist entirely in the realm of fantasy. There isn't a shred of evidence to support any of it. These stories say more about our human need to fill terrifying voids with monsters. Another theory suggests the men were deliberately taken from the island. One version claims they were abducted by foreign spies. At the turn of the 20th century, tensions were brewing across Europe, and maybe the keepers saw something they shouldn't have, a secret meeting or a submarine, and were silenced. A related idea suggests the men weren't taken at all, but that they arranged for a ship to take them away to start new lives. Fed up with the harsh, lonely existence, they supposedly paid a passing boat to ferry them to a new world. Both of these theories crumble under scrutiny. Arranging a secret rendezvous in the seas around the Flannans would be a logistical nightmare. Plus, James Ducat and Donald MacArthur were married with children. It seems incredibly unlikely they would abandon their families. And if you're running away, why leave your last paycheck behind? As for the spy theory, there's just no evidence to suggest any foreign power was interested in a remote Scottish lighthouse in 1900. Each of these theories provides a tantalizing alternative to the official story. But without evidence, they remain just that. Stories. The most logical path, the one supported by the physical evidence, leads back to Robert Muirhead's conclusion. It leads back to the water. The Flannan Isles mystery is a puzzle with missing pieces. For over 120 years, people have tried to fit them together, but the picture is still incomplete. We've walked through the evidence, from official reports to the wildest speculation. Now, I want to hear from you. Based on everything we've discussed, what do you think really happened to James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur? Was it the terrifying power of a rogue wave, a sudden act of violence, or something else entirely? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you find these unsolved mysteries as fascinating as I do, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation. In the end, we are left where we began, on a windswept rock in the North Atlantic, staring at an empty lighthouse. The bodies of the three keepers were never recovered, leaving their families in a state of perpetual limbo. The lighthouse itself was not abandoned. A new team of keepers was soon assigned, but life on Eilean Moor was forever changed, shrouded in a chilling legend. The lighthouse was fully automated in 1971, and since then it has stood silent, its light now powered by machines, a lonely sentinel guarding its own dark secret. The story has seeped into our culture, inspiring poems, songs by the rock band Genesis, and even the recent film, The Vanishing. We're drawn to this story because it touches on our deepest fears, the fear of the dark, of isolation, and the terrifying power of the natural world. While the most credible explanation points to a dreadful accident, the mystery endures because it's incomplete. Without a final witness, there will always be a sliver of doubt, a space for our imagination to wander into darker territories. The overturned chair, the stopped clock, the single set of oilskins left behind, these are the details that haunt us. Perhaps the final truth of what happened on Eilean Moor is not something to be found in a dusty report or a sensational theory. Perhaps it's simply written in the relentless crash of the waves against the cliffs, a story told in a language we can hear but never fully understand. The keepers are gone, absorbed by the sea and the legend they left behind. Their story is a humbling reminder that even in our modern world, some places remain wild, Some mysteries remain unsolved, and the ocean always keeps its secrets.